Okay, well, I think it's time to get going. So hello, everybody, and welcome to this first webinar in our second year of the CAQDAS webinar series. These webinars are organized by the CAQDAS Networking Project, which is based in the Department of Sociology at the University of Surrey. And we're really pleased to say that with over 1,800 registrations to our webinars over the last year, and with more of you coming forward interested in sharing your own experiences and insights around the use of computer-assisted qualitative data analysis, we've decided that we're going to continue this initiative for the foreseeable future. I'm Sarah Bullock, and this first webinar today is going to be given by my colleague, Christina Silver. As mentioned, we have a number of upcoming webinars already planned and more to come. So please do keep an eye on our website and our social media channels for information about those. And if you're interested in contributing to our webinar series, please do get in touch because we'd really love to hear from you. We have slots still available, so do just let us know. All of our webinars are recorded, and you're going to be sent a link to the recording of this one and all recordings of last year's webinars and the ones that are to come will be available on the given YouTube channel. So do just pop there to see those. The CAQDAS Networking Project is also gearing up to the first courses of this academic year. And so some of these now will be run online and others will be run face-to-face. It would be great to see you on those, or do pass that information on to others who you think might benefit. So today, Christina Silver is going to be sharing with us some information about an initiative designed to support users of multiple CAQDAS packages to exchange analyzed data. Christina is the manager of the CAQDAS Networking Project, where she first started teaching in 1998. And since then, she's worked both through the CAQDAS Networking Project and as co-founder and director of qualitative data analysis services. And she has trained through those thousands of researchers all over the world in a wide range of computer-assisted qualitative data analysis packages. And it's this expertise really in a wide range of CAQDAS and the relationships built with their developers over time that's led Christina to her involvement in the REFI-QDA standard project, which is what she's going to be telling us a little bit more about today. When she's not working, Christina loves swimming and camping, and she's just completed the 2021 Cancer Research and Marie Curie Swimathon. So whilst Christina's speaking today, please feel free to post your questions or comments in the chat function, and I'll collate them and pose them to her when she's finished her talk. So with no further ado, Christina, over to you.
Great, thank you, Sarah. Let me just do the technical bit, which is to share my screen. Hopefully you can now see that. Okay. Perfect. Excellent. Thank you very much. So as Sarah mentioned, I'm going to talk today about the Rotterdam Exchange Format Initiative, which I believe constitutes a step change for qualitative researchers and analysis. It's a means by which we can, for the first time, reliably exchange analysed data between different CAQDAS packages. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the historical context of REFI, which is the acronym for the initiative. I'm going to talk a little bit about what problem it seeks to solve, and then give you some technical information about how it works and how you can make use of it, including a little bit of discussion about what the benefits are to different qualitative communities. Okay, so first of all, a little bit of historical context. As I'm sure many of you are aware, CAQDAS packages, dedicated software programs and applications designed to support, to facilitate the analysis of qualitative data, have been around for quite a long time. The mid-1980s, the first programs started to become available. and they were developed very much in isolation from one another. Okay, and for that reason, we've ended up with quite a lot of choices. There are now dozens of different options out there, and if you're interested in knowing about those different options and making informed choices between them, then there's a webinar that we gave earlier this year which touches on those topics. But most of those products developed as commercial products, meaning that we pay for them. Okay, there have been at various times since the mid-1980s, there have been various free applications, free software programs available, and there is now a move towards more free and open source applications. And again, we have a webinar about those specific types of tools that you can watch the recording on, that was given by one of the proponents of free and open source qualitative software, Vicky Ramkin. But that historical context of multiple different products being developed essentially in isolation of each other, and therefore becoming over time competitors of one another, has meant that no universal market leader has emerged. We can have a discussion about what the implications of that are on our field, but really the point is that lots of different researchers are using different tools to analyze their qualitative materials. And that raises a number of issues for us as researchers, methodologists, and also teachers of qualitative methods. So the key problem really is that given the amount of time, effort, and potentially money involved in learning and using an individual CAQDAS package, we become locked in. Most people become locked into using one product. And that may be also partly to do with site licenses at various organizations. For example, universities tend to make a decision about which one, maybe two, but often not more than that, products to make available for researchers, academic researchers and students to use. And the same is true of research organizations. So researchers tend to be locked into one product. Some people are familiar with more than one, but as a general rule, we tend to learn one product and be focused on using that product. And that means that it becomes difficult, if not impossible, to move our data from one to another. Okay, and historically, because these CAQDAS packages have been commercial products, they haven't had the need or desire to make it easy or possible to move data from their competitors' programs into and out of their own products. And that causes issues for us as qualitative researchers, particularly if, for example, I'm working in an institution and I'm familiar with one CAQDAS package and I want to collaborate with somebody who's working at a different institution who has available a different CAQDAS package, then it becomes difficult for us to work collaboratively on the same set of data because we're locked into these different products. So that's the essence really of the problem that has developed over the years. So what's the solution? Hopefully the Rotterdam Exchange Format Initiative becomes the solution, because it's very much being designed with those problems in mind and with the idea that wanting to open up the field so that we can collaborate and work together and really reap the benefits of multiple tools from different CAQDAS packages. And I'll come back and touch on that later on. Before I talk a little bit about how this initiative came about and what it looks like, It's worth mentioning that there have been attempts in the past to develop exchange mechanisms, but the difference with this one is that it's developed by the CAQDAS developers themselves, rather than by researchers or archives or others who are not actually in the realm of developing the individual programs themselves. And that's maybe one of the reasons why this success of this project has been as much as it is. Okay, so let me tell you a little bit about how it came about. So back in 2016, there was a conference held in Rotterdam in the Netherlands, which was organized by Qualon, which is the Dutch organization for qualitative research. And Janine Evers, who you can see at the top, standing up in the top of the image there, she organized that conference. And at the end of that conference, we had a discussion and a debate about this issue, about the problem of working collaboratively across these different CAQDAS packages. And she invited the developers of many of the leading CAQDAS packages at the time to debate the issues and to discuss how a solution to the problem could come about. And we had many developers in person at the conference. You can see top right there, some of them, but also developers who weren't able to travel to Rotterdam in 2016 joined in that debate via Zoom, before the days that Zoom was the normal way of communicating for many people. And there's actually a YouTube recording of that discussion, and Janine facilitated debating the issues. And at the end of that conference, several CAQDAS developers had committed to the idea of working together to solve this issue. And that is where REFI, the Rotterdam Exchange Format Initiative, came out from, and that's why it's called REFI. That's why Rotterdam is in the name, because it started in Rotterdam at that conference. Okay, so I mentioned earlier that the difference with this initiative is that it's developed from the ground up, meaning that several CAQDAS developers have been involved in working together for the first time, putting aside their commercial interests and working together to develop this exchange standard for the good of the qualitative research community. And the 6 logos that you can see there on the screen are the 6 qualitative software programs who have been directly involved in the development of the exchange standard right from the outset. So that's Atlas TI, F4 Analysed, NVivo, QDA Minor, Quirkos, and Transana. And in order to facilitate the working between those developers on the exchange is a coordination group. And initially, Janine Evers, who started this initiative, chaired the coordination group. I've been involved from the outset, along with a couple of others. Janine has now retired from the endeavour, and I'm working closely with Christy Jackson and Fred van Bloemstein and Graham Gibbs. And we are either qualitative researchers, methodologists, teachers, or experts in the technical side of developing exchange standards like this. That's where Fred, who's bottom left of the 4 images there, comes in. The other 3 of us are really have specialism in qualitative analysis and CAQDAS packages more generally. Okay, so that's a little bit about how it came about and who's involved in it, and the four of us coordinate it, but the bulk of the actual technical work, of course, is done by the developers of the CAQDAS packages themselves. But what actually is it? That's the question that many of you have probably got bubbling around your brains. Well, really, it comprises two things in terms of the stages of the development. First of all, we developed a Codebook Exchange as a means of ensuring that the way that we were thinking that the programs could speak to one another was going to work. And subsequently, once we had that working, we developed a full project exchange, and the Codebook Exchange is now part of that project exchange, and that is still being developed. So I'm going to tell you a little bit, first of all, about what the Codebook Exchange is, and then talk about the project exchange. So the REFI-QDA Codebook Exchange. First of all, we need to be clear about what a codebook is. Those of you who are qualitative researchers, I'm sure, will be very clear about what a codebook is. But the way that we're using that term in the context of this exchange is thinking about a codebook as being a list of defined keywords, individual keywords or short phrases that represent concepts, themes, categories, or topics that are of interest to the qualitative researcher. Methodologically, they tend to be called codes, okay? But what those codes represent will be determined by the methodological context and the area of interest, of course. And many of you will be very familiar with Johnny Saldana's work, which is the kind of go-to text for thinking about what codes are and what coding is, and different types of codes and coding in different methodological contexts. In terms of qualitative software, CAQDAS packages, some of the work that myself and Anne Lewins have done take the kind of methodological side of codes and coding and talk about how that manifests itself within these different software programs. And that's really the context that we're thinking about codes and the codebook in terms of this ability that we now have to exchange. So let's take that a little bit further and think about it in a bit more concrete terms. So codebooks in CAQDAS packages. Well, in a CAQDAS package, the codebook is not in isolation from the coding process. That's the first thing just to reflect on, because the codes that we develop as researchers, that we label, they are used to link to segments of data where we see that concept, that theme, that topic evidencing itself. So it's a kind of tagging process. If you're new to thinking about coding in qualitative software, essentially from a technical perspective, it's a means of tagging a chunk of data, which might be a sentence or a paragraph or a word in a text file, or maybe a portion of an image or a clip in a video. But in terms of the REFI Codebook Exchange, it's the codes themselves that we're thinking about, not the data. The data comes in the project exchange, which I'll mention later on. So a codebook, in terms of how I'm discussing it right now, is essentially a list of those labels, those words, those phrases, and essentially their definitions also. So from a methodological point of view, it will almost certainly be very, very important to define the codes as well as label them. And different qualitative software programs allow us to organize those codes within what we're calling today the codebook in a whole variety of different ways. So just to give you a little bit of an idea about that, here are 3 screenshots from 3 different programs. Bottom left, we can see from Transana, a codebook that's listed hierarchically in the sense that we have a top level with the codes hanging underneath. Transana actually calls them keywords rather than codes, but the little red keys are indicating the actual keywords, the codes, and they can be organized into keyword groups. So interruption is the one that I've got showing opened up there in the list with 4 utterance codes hanging underneath. So that's showing a hierarchical listing. NVivo allows you to create hierarchies of codes in a list view in a similar way, although in NVivo you don't have to organize your codes in that way. And on the screenshot for NVivo, I've also displayed the descriptions. We can describe codes in all of the different programs. Here for NVivo, I've just shown how you can display the descriptions alongside the list. And at the top right, I've got a screenshot from QAQDAS, which is showing a completely different way of visualizing groups or trees or hierarchies of codes. QAQDAS calls codes quirks rather than codes or keywords. But from a technical exchange point of view, they're all means by which we organize those aspects that we're interested in capturing in our qualitative data. Okay, so what then can be exchanged in the Codebook Exchange? So here on the right-hand side, for those of you that are more technically savvy than I, is a screenshot of the UML class diagram for the REFI-QDA Codebook Exchange. Okay, and we can see that the codebook comprises several elements. So as well as the codes themselves, we have descriptions and sets, and they together comprise this codebook. Okay, so you can see in the square or the rectangle that's representing the codes themselves, that the element of the code in the diagram, in the schema, has various attributes. So the GUID, which is a global unique identifier for each element, the name, so in this instance would be the name of the code, so whatever the concept or theme is that it represents, whether it's codable or not. So in some programs we have organizational codes that have primarily or only an organizational purpose, and therefore the coding happens at the level down. So therefore in the schema it needs to indicate whether the code is codable at or not. Most qualitative software programs allow the user to apply color to their codes. We saw that very visually in the previous screenshot for QAQDAS. So that's what the color is, and that has the property of RGB and numeric property for indicating the color. And then the code can have a description. In addition, because some programs allow codes to be organized in multiple different ways, the Codebook Exchange allows sets of codes to also be exchanged if they exist in a project. And a set of codes is simply an alternative grouping from the main listing of the codebooks. So in programs that allow that can also be exchanged. And then the final thing, I guess, here to say is that hopefully you can see to the bottom right of that square that indicates the code, you can see another little square that says house child. That's the indication of the hierarchical nature of the code. So when we saw in Transana and also in NVivo, that listing of one code with subcodes hanging indented underneath, they are known as child codes in most programs and in the schema. So the codebook, in terms of the REFI-QDA exchange that I'm talking about today, contains the codes, but not the codings, okay? Because the Codebook Exchange is a means of simply exchanging that list with the definitions and the organization, etc., from one qualitative software program to another. Okay, hopefully that makes sense. If not, then of course you can ask questions at the end. But before I move on and talk about the project exchange, it's worth talking a little bit about the benefits of enabling this exchange of codebooks without any underlying data or codings. Before I go through that, the 6 software programs down the right-hand side, of course, they are the CAQDAS packages that were directly involved in developing the exchange. So they've obviously implemented the Codebook Exchange, but there are other CAQDAS packages that have now also implemented the ability to exchange codebooks. And you can see those at the bottom, and there will be more adding that functionality in due course. So what are the benefits of enabling this codebook exchange? Well, for me, they fall into 3 kind of groups, if you like: collaborative benefits, methodological benefits, and pedagogic benefits. So firstly, collaboratively, as I mentioned earlier, one of the drivers for this initiative was the idea that because there was this tendency to be locked into one program, that it was difficult, if not impossible, for researchers working in different institutions to collaborate. And this Codebook Exchange means that that's no longer an issue in terms of codebooks, because we can now start to share ideas with other individuals or teams working in similar fields. So for example, if I'm working on a project in a particular substantive area, and I know that there are others working in different disciplines or different countries or different data contexts, then I can share my ideas via this Codebook Exchange with them. And from a qualitative methodological point of view, a codebook is a key means by which we can communicate our understandandings of what's interesting and meaningful in our qualitative material. So those codebooks themselves, sharing them can be methodologically very useful. And I guess that also leads on to the next point, which is building on previous research. So many of us working in not only academic contexts, but other contexts may build on previous research in the future, and being able to access existing or previously used codebooks and then tweaking them, adding to them, developing them for a future piece of research is, of course, very useful and very time-saving, that I can now export from one and import into another for that purpose. Methodologically, this is really about transparency and rigor. So one of the criticisms historically of qualitative research has been this idea that what we do is kind of hidden, because qualitative researchers haven't always been very good at explaining in detail, in a concrete way, how they get from their data to their interpretation, to the account that they develop. And this opens up the conceptual side of that via the Codebook Exchange. The use of qualitative software generally, I think, does that also, but this exchanging of codebooks is another element of that transparency, and that's only for the good of our methodological process. Related to that, and from a kind of pedagogic point of view, which is something I'm particularly interested in, teaching these different software programs and teaching different qualitative and mixed methods methodologies, it's also always really useful to have different kinds of examples. And this ability to exchange codebooks gives me the opportunity of asking colleagues, okay, can you share with me your codebook so I can use that as a means of discussing with students and other researchers ways of efficiently and powerfully using coding in terms of structure and organization of a codebook, but also in terms of practicing the procedures of coding in a kind of teaching context. And that's, I think, from a practical and pedagogic point of view, a really key benefit, certainly that I've been using myself since this was available. And related to that is, I mentioned earlier, the importance of defining codes. So it strikes me always when I'm teaching the number of often established researchers, as well as those who are more new to the field of qualitative research, who develop lots of codes, but don't define them maybe at all or precisely. And this ability to exchange codebooks and use that as a means of discussing the process of coding in very concrete terms, I think is a really important and good thing in terms of best practice for those of us who teach methods. And that kind of relates to the last point that I want to say about codebooks, which is what we're currently planning. So I'm currently exploring how to make available or how to develop a repository or a library of qualitative codebooks that researchers can share with one another in order to facilitate that methodological transparency and also the sort of substantive project building. And there's 4 examples just to touch on quickly. So this idea came about when Ian Brooks, a colleague of mine, contacted me and about a codebook that he developed for the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. And that's where this idea of having a repository, he wanted to use the Exchange standard to make that codebook available to others that he knew were working using those development goals. And that's kind of where it started. And also I've been working with Steve Wright from Lancaster University on developing a template for a codebook for doing literature reviews, and that draws very heavily on work that Pat Baisley, many of you will know of Pat Baisley's really excellent methods work in this field. So we're working together from a kind of teaching perspective to make available to students a template for a literature review codebook that they can adapt for their different substantive area if they're wanting to use a qualitative software program to undertake their literature review. I'm also working with Amir Mikhailovich from the University of British Columbia and discussing with him whether he would be able to make available his codebook from the research work he's been doing around graduate students' engagement in the use of qualitative software. And hopefully that will be something that's useful to the community generally, as well as in terms of this exchange work. And finally, myself and Anne Lewins are currently writing the 3rd edition of our textbook using software and qualitative research. And we're intending to make available the codebooks for our 3 example case studies that we work on, that we talk about throughout the book available as a resource using this Codebook Exchange. So these are just 4 examples, but the idea is to have a repository when any qualitative or mixed methods researcher can upload their codebook and make that available to the community to be used or adapted in different circumstances. And I think that that is a really great opportunity for our field, often meaning that we don't need to reinvent the wheel. We can build on each other's work in that way. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about the project exchange. Okay, so the Codebook Exchange, as I mentioned, is the ability to exchange a list of organized codes from one qualitative software program to another in order to use for any of those various reasons. The project exchange was the second phase of our work, which was a lot more complicated, a lot more complex, because it's about exchanging a much larger body of material from one qualitative software program, one CAQDAS package to another. Okay, so essentially it's called the project exchange because we're talking about exchanging a whole CAQDAS project from one program to another. And that means a CAQDAS project in this context is a file that contains or links to all of the data and the analysis that has happened on that data within one file. Okay, so hopefully you can see straight away that that's a much larger, more complex endeavor. So therefore it's important to think a little bit, first of all, about what's included. Okay, so one of the things about these different CAQDAS packages, and one of the reasons that so many of them are available, is because they all have specific functionalities. So many qualitative software programs have core functionality that they share, but maybe implement slightly differently. But each qualitative software program has some functionality that is unique to it. Okay, and that causes a number of issues for the development of an exchange in terms of, okay, well, if one program can do something and the other program can't, how can that be handled when we're taking it across? So for that reason, in the first iteration of the exchange, we focused on the data themselves, okay, and what we determined as a group were the core common analytic components, okay? And in order to decide what those core common analytic components were, we needed to come up with some criteria. And those the main criterion was that at least 2 programs had to have something in order for it to make it into the exchange. Okay, so we weren't going to initially develop the ability to exchange something that less than 2 programs had the ability to do. That kind of makes sense if you think about it. There's no point in making the ability to exchange something that nobody else can handle on the other end. But because we're working with 6 CAQDAS packages in developing this, it was those 6 CAQDAS packages that determined what those core components were. Okay, so what are they? You can see here terminology was a big issue because sometimes a particular component in one program is called something different in another program. I alluded to that earlier when I was talking about codes. So Transana calls codes keywords, Quirkos calls codes quirks, and NVivo calls codes codes. Here you can see on the left-hand column, the first column in this table is the term used by the exchange standard itself, and then the other columns are illustrating what the native term for that component is within each program. And you can see that there are some instances when a program doesn't have that component. That's what the NAs are about. So F4 analysed, for example, doesn't enable linking in the way that that is operationalized within the standard. But there are other examples of components, for example, a code and a selection and a source that are in every single CAQDAS package, but maybe are labeled differently. So what I'm now going to do is to go through some of these and explain them hopefully in a little bit more detail. And first of all, I'm going to show you what the schema looks like in its entirety. Now, if you're not very technically, if you're like me and you don't really understand the back end of how software works, this diagram may be quite mystifying to you. Every time I look at it, I have to spend quite a lot of time trying to understand it again. But basically, this is showing us how all of those different, in fact, I've been using the term component, but in the schema, it's called an element. Each element in the Exchange standard is represented by one of these kind of yellowish boxes, and you can see the lines that are telling us the relationship between them in there. And I'm going to pick out a few of these things to hopefully make it a little bit clearer. But basically, the project Exchange allows me to export from one program in a particular file format, and that's a QDPX extension, and then import that file into another program and see everything appear in that other program. And the technicalities of how that work are to do with XML files and different zip folders, etc. If you want all of the technical detail about that, that's all available on the REFI website. I'm not going to go into that level of detail today. You can find it all if you need it. Okay, so let's talk about this kind of from a researcher point of view. Okay, sources, the data that we can exchange in this current version are text files, PDF files, docx, and multimedia. Okay, now text files can be plain or formatted, but formatted text is represented by plain text. So basically, the Exchange converts the text into a means by which it can be understood by all of the other programs. Multimedia data sources, so audio, video, can have written transcripts associated with them, and those written transcripts can be synchronized with the multimedia source file, the audio or the video file, by what we call sync points, which are basically the time points within the multimedia file. And that's what's represented in the technical schema on the right-hand side here. From a researcher point of view, basically what this means is that audio, video, and text data is what we were focusing on initially. Okay, a selection in terms of the schema is a chunk of data that is identified by the researcher as a meaningful unit that we want to analyze. Okay, so we may, from a researcher point of view, think about a selection as a segment or a chunk of data. It may be words, phrases, paragraphs in text, or a clip in a video, whatever. Okay, so in audio video, selections are captured by milliseconds, so where it starts and where it ends from to. In text, that's done by characters. In images, that's done by X and Y coordinates. And in transcripts, which are those synchronized written transcripts that are associated, synchronized with the multimedia data, that's done via those sync points. So selections are important in terms of transferring what has happened with those bits of data that the researcher finds interesting when it's moved to another CAQDAS package. Then we've got what we call metadata. So the project itself has various bits of information, metadata information about it. So the name, the description, the origin, various information about the user, when it was created, modified, etc. And we initially agreed upon those attributes for the metadata based on what was commonly captured or functionally available in those 6 programs. But we've also been in discussion with archives about adding additional metadata so that the exchange can be a standard means of archiving analysed qualitative data sets. And I'll come back to that later on. Okay, coding. I've mentioned coding already because I've talked about the code book. So I'm going to jump over this a little bit. But the code book is subsumed in the project exchange. Okay, so if a CAQDAS package implements the project exchange, they don't also need to implement the Codebook Exchange because the Codebook is subsumed in the project exchange. But in the project exchange, as well as the Codebook, we also have all of what I called earlier the codings. So all of the links between the codes and the selections, the segments of data. And that's what's represented here. And as I mentioned earlier, codes can be linked to each other, hierarchically organized, and also be parts of sets of alternative groupings. So that's a little bit of replication from the Codebook Exchange. Then we have a case. So a case really, in many senses, is like a code, but it has the ability also to have variables associated with it. Okay, so sources, data files, and selections, so parts of data files, can belong to cases. Okay, and those cases can have variable values associated with them. And the use case for this in the software programs that enable it in this way is to do with units of analysis and applying variables to them. So for example, if I have data about one respondent from multiple different sources, but I want to think about that one respondent as one person, then a case and its associated variables will allow me to work in a streamlined way. So not all of the 6 CAQDAS packages that developed the exchange enable this, but at least 2 of them do, which is why it's there in the project. But of course, if you don't have them in your project, then it just wouldn't need to be exchanged, so it would be ignored. And then I also just want to touch on notes from a qualitative researcher point of view. Then the thoughts we have in our mind when we're looking at our data, of course, are really important, and they are represented in the schema as notes, which can be linked to all kinds of other elements. And I've brought up the big schema back up here just to show you that a note basically can be linked to all kinds of different things. It's very difficult to show you just visually what all of those things are, because from that element, the note in the schema, it's linked to all kinds of different things, okay? And they are sources, so you can make a note on a source, you can make a note on a selection, on a case, a code, a link, a variable, and a set. So basically, like little post-it notes, sticky notes around your project. And from a researcher point of view, really important to be able to exchange those thoughts as well as the data and the codings themselves. Okay, then we've also got what the schema calls graphs, which may be maps or models in different projects. And that consists of boxes, so shapes, and then edges or lines that connect those shapes together. And that's what's shown here. And again, not all CAQDAS packages enable this functionality, but it's in the schema because several do. Okay, so I'm aware that I'm running out of time slightly. So that was mainly focusing on the key elements of the schema and hopefully trying to frame that or discuss that from in a kind of researcher analysis context. Again, here the benefits. Before I go through those briefly, then of course the 6 developers have implemented this, but we've also got other programs that have developed, that have implemented it as well. and hopefully that will increase as time goes by. In terms of the benefits, again, like the Codebook Exchange, they are collaborative, methodological, and pedagogic, but they're much more detailed benefits. I think we can take those benefits to a much greater degree now. So we're able to move analysed data from one CAQDAS package to another, and that has a whole range of benefits, not least the ability to use functionality that's in package B that I don't have available in the package that I'm used to using. Okay, so that extends the possibilities as a researcher to work with my data beyond what's available in the package that I am familiar with or have access to. And that is profoundly changes the way that we can think about what we can do with our data. And it's amazing, really, that these developers who are commercial competitors of each other have enabled that through this. It's to the great benefit of the research community. It's an excellent thing that they've done. It enables team members using different products to work collaboratively much more efficiently than has ever been possible before on one set of data. And it enables researchers who move institutions to take their analysed data with them. So that lock-in issue is no longer needs to be a problem. And that's really important from a practical perspective, of course. And from the pedagogic perspective, it enables teachers of qualitative methods to really concretely demonstrate the difference between CAQDAS packages and also the difference between methodological approaches, because I can take one set of data from one program, which is around a particular approach to analysis, discourse analysis, for example, and then show how that could be done in another program, because I can move the data across. And that really changes the landscape in terms of concretely illustrating methods as well as technologies from a teaching perspective. Okay, we've got various plans. We've currently got a little tiny bit of funding from the SAGE Ocean Concept Grants. And with that, we're going to do two things principally: improve the exchange of audio visual data. I mentioned that was part of the first iteration, but it's got a few little things that need ironing out. So we're focusing on that with the money we've got currently. And we're also developing further the testing data sets, which will enable other CAQDAS packages to implement the standard more easily, and also be useful for illustrative methodological purposes. We've got various other things that we want to do. I mentioned archiving earlier, and there's always more that we'd like to do, isn't there? So without going into the detail of that, those three there, the audiovisual data, the testing data sets, and the metadata for archiving purposes are really what we're focusing on moving forward. I'm going to stop talking.
Thank you, Christina. Thank you very, very much. There's been a resounding excitement and general interest around what's been going on. And I think we've all benefited greatly from having a bit of more insight into what's happening in this project. I know for myself, I knew something about it, but I realize now that I knew very little indeed, based on what you've just discussed. And it really does represent some really exciting developments. I have got a few questions from the audience about what you said, and also kind of extensions of it. So Trina's asked about whether the exchange works only for the most recent versions of the packages, or whether it's possible to exchange in older versions.
That's a great question. So it depends on which program you're thinking of, Trina. So basically, of the 6 programs that were involved in developing it, they have it implemented in all of the versions of their software from the one that was current when it was first available. So that goes back, when was it first available? First launched in, I can't remember if it was 2018 or 2019 now. But whenever that point was, and actually on our website, it says, I think, which versions. But as the new versions come out, then they implement it in the new version. So most of those ones go back 1 or 2, maybe.
Okay, thank you. And participants seem to be really interested in the repository, the idea of a repository of code books. And there's some questions around that about, well, where is it that at now, and how does it look like people could access it and or contribute to it, and does contribution to it depend, access of it depend on you contributing? Is it sort of a...
Okay, so where it is now is it's still in our heads. So it's something that I think is really important to do, and I have been looking into where it can be hosted.
Okay.
But basically the idea, there's a couple of ideas about where it could be hosted, but nothing's been finally decided about that yet, because of the kind of cost and maintenance implications of it. And we're essentially unfunded. So although we've got a little bit of funding at the moment, it's not much funding, and it's going to run out pretty soon. So we need to think about how that repository would be maintained over time.
Yeah.
So that's something that the coordination group are looking into right now. In terms of how it would work, I mean, the idea is it's going to be completely open. So anybody could upload. We will obviously have some sort of guidelines about what needs to be in it or not, and there'll be some descriptions about the project. Those kinds of things are still to be ironed out. But you don't need to upload something in order to be able to make use of somebody else's. The idea is that researchers will freely give their code books to be used and adapted by others without having to do anything else.
Perfect. Thank you for that. And then there was quite a lot of chat about how indeed this initiative would be bolstering rigor of what's of our work in terms of sort of transparency. So Carleen was saying that it seemed from what you were saying that the Codebook Exchange can really add to the rigor of the analysis process. And there's 2 sort of add-on questions to that from Carleen. One is to do with what would be the ethical implications for codebook sharing? Was there any kind of discussion around that from the initiative? And also, is it possible, if you're thinking about using this initiative as an increasing the kind of the audit trail of what's happening in the project, would it be possible to use the meta archiving data, so the exporting of what you're doing, to create a kind of an accurate audit trail?
Okay, there's lots of questions in that question.
Yeah, sorry.
Sarah. So the ethical issues of sharing code books, I think, are much less than the ethical issues of sharing analysed data.
Yeah.
I guess from our perspective, the REFI project, what we're doing is facilitating the development of the ability to exchange. How whether it's our responsibility to dictate what the ethical issues with that are, I would question. I think it would be, in terms of the repository of the codebooks, I think it would be up to the individual researcher who's uploading their codebook. It would be their responsibility to consider the ethical considerations of doing that. But no data is involved, right? It's just a list of codes and their definitions. But we're not going to take on the responsibility for policing the ethical side of that. There's no way we've got the capacity for that. For the project side of things, that's a very different issue. So we're never going to be making a repository of projects that have been exchanged using our standard. That's what archives are all about. And I saw quickly a note in the chat from Sebastian. I didn't read it fully, but he works at the qualitative data repository archive, can't remember the name of it properly, in the United States, and there are others around the world, some of which have already adopted REFI-Exchange as their preferred means of archiving data. So the ethical issues around this are handled, I think, by the archives, who have really good knowledge about these issues.
Yeah, great, thank you. There are a few more questions, but we are running out of time, unfortunately. So what we'll do is what we always do, is that we're going to, I'll pose these to Christina after the session today, and then she will look at those questions and put together a few responses to them, which will be circulated to you as a group of people who've been attendees today. So I just want to thank you again, Christina, for sharing with us the kind of ins and outs of what's been going on with the initiative. And as I said before, great to have a sort of an inside eye on what that is looking like, and so exciting for everybody working in this field. So thank you. Also, just to everybody who's been here, thanks so much for joining us. It's been a great start to this new year of our webinar series. Thank you. Do look out for the next ones that are coming up. There are a few slots in between here also that are available, so please get in touch if you want to contribute. And remember that the recording of today will be circulated to you, but also you can access that on our YouTube channel. So thanks again for everybody being here today. Great to see everybody, and hope to see you again very soon on one of our next webinars. Thank you.
Thanks, Sarah.
Bye-bye, everybody.